What happens when your silence speaks louder than any scream? The most devastating reply is not anger. It's absence. You don't win by reacting. You win by staying silent, calm, and unreadable. What if I told you that the most destructive response isn't a fiery argument, it's silence, that the sharpest weapon isn't what you say, but what you choose not to say? People chase closure not because they need peace, but because they can't bear the confusion. They beg for explanations, not for truth, but for the illusion of control. They want you to argue, to plead, to fight back. Why? So they can twist your words and reclaim the narrative. But when you don't argue, when you don't explain, you become an unsolvable puzzle to their fragile ego. That's the power of silence, revenge that doesn't look like revenge but cuts even deeper. Silence doesn't attack, it reflects. It forces them to hear the echo of their own guilt bouncing back at them. This isn't ghosting. This is psychological warfare, a battle they never saw coming. And the moment you realize that, you stop justifying your growth to those who were never worthy of it. Comment this now if you've ever felt that shift within. I don't argue, I upgrade. This is where the shift begins. Change doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't show up with fanfare or speeches. Sometimes it starts in the quietest of moments, the moment you choose not to react, not to defend, not to explain. That's when it begins. You stop being predictable. You stop being available to their manipulation. To them, it feels like betrayal. But to you, it feels like evolution. You no longer bite the bait. You don't scramble to clarify. You step into a stronger version of yourself, one that values peace over performance, and suddenly, they feel it. The tension, the distance, but they don't know why. And that not knowing, it drives them mad, because they expect you to beg when they ignore you, to chase when they withdraw, to justify when they attack. But when you stay still, when you go quiet, you force them to sit in their own confusion. And that confusion does what no confrontation ever could. It shatters their illusion of control. When you choose silence, it's not your voice they miss, it's their own thoughts they begin to hear. And that is what terrifies them. You see, when you go quiet, people don't just miss the sound of your voice, they start hearing their own. And most people aren't ready for that. They're not afraid of your silence, they're afraid of the thoughts that come with it, because silence is a mirror, and not everyone has the courage to face their reflection. When you used to argue, they had control. They could provoke, twist, deflect, but the moment you stopped responding, they lost that grip. Now they're left with confusion. Now they're projecting. Now they're panicking, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. You didn't explain your boundaries. You didn't justify your distance. You didn't beg for understanding. And that absence, that lack of validation creates a hunger in their mind, a psychological craving. They want answers. They want closure. But instead, you gave them a void they can't fill with ego, excuses, or noise. And that is where your true leverage begins, not from power seized, but from access denied. You didn't block them to punish. You didn't cut them off to be cruel. You simply chose peace over performance. And now they don't know what to do with that, because they were expecting drama, chaos, a storm. But you gave them stillness, and now that stillness is deafening. Let them interpret your silence however they need to. That's no longer your responsibility. Your focus now is self-control, because each time you break that silence to defend yourself, you give up ground. You validate their narrative. But when you stay quiet, you say everything. You say they're no longer worth your breath. You show them they can no longer manipulate your emotions. That kind of power doesn't roar. It doesn't make a scene. It simply walks away, shuts the door, and never looks back. And by the time they finally understand what your silence meant, it's already too late. The version of you who tolerated chaos doesn't exist anymore. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're just done. And to someone who feeds on control, nothing is more terrifying than a person they can no longer provoke. When your presence was taken for granted, it's your absence that starts haunting them. louder than anything you ever said. You left no warning, no dramatic exit, no final confrontation. And that's exactly what shattered their script. You were supposed to react. You were supposed to explain. But instead, they're left staring into a silence that feels strange, unfamiliar, and deeply unsettling. You've become an unsolved mystery, a question mark that lingers in the corners of their mind. And the truth is, nothing disturbs the ego more than a lack of closure. Because when the truth isn't given, the mind invents one. And that invented truth is rarely kind. They begin replaying every message, every interaction, searching for the exact moment you began to pull away. They blame you, then themselves, then you again, caught in the confusion. And that confusion, that's the point. Your silence isn't about punishing them, it's about protecting your peace. You didn't disappear to hurt them, you disappeared to heal you. And now, without realizing it, they're carrying the emotional weight you once bore, the overthinking, the second-guessing, the sleepless nights. That burden is no longer yours. While they spiral deeper into the mystery of what went wrong, you rise, clear, composed, and distant. They may reach out, not from care, but from curiosity. Because most people don't want you back. They want back the access they once had. And when they finally realize you've outgrown the version of yourself that once needed them, they'll study your silence even harder, desperately hoping to find a crack in your calm. Don't give it to them. Let them sit in the discomfort they created. Let them analyze every unspoken word. Because in their world now, your absence is the loudest presence of all. When your silence left them confused, your calmness became the sharpest weapon you ever used. They no longer know where you stand emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. They don't know what you're thinking or how to reach you anymore. You've exited the battlefield untouched, while they're still swinging at shadows. Because the truth is, people are addicted to reaction. They feed on dragging you into chaos, watching you flinch, defend, explain, and break. But when you stay composed, when your face doesn't twitch, your voice doesn't shake, and your silence remains razor sharp, they feel powerless. That's when they realize nothing they say can touch you now. That's psychological dominance. That's control without confrontation. You don't need to raise your voice to command a room. You don't even need to speak. Your stillness exposes what their noise could never hide: themselves. Control isn't about overpowering others. It's about mastering yourself. When you don't react, you claim the moment. You set the emotional tone of the space, and people begin to adjust to you, not the other way around. You're no longer a thermometer, reacting to the room. You become the thermostat, setting the climate, controlling the energy. And the ones who used to provoke you, manipulate you, try to control you, they start to fear you. Not because you're aggressive, but because you're unmoved. When you stop reacting, you don't just master the moment, you become untouchable. Real strength isn't about feeling nothing. It's about feeling everything and choosing to reveal nothing. You can't control what they say. You can't control what they believe, but you can control whether it touches you or not. And when you reach that stillness, when your mind no longer chases closure, when your emotions no longer spill, you become a fortress. Their games fall flat. Their provocations dissolve into silence. And your stillness becomes your signature, not because you're weak, but because you no longer waste fire on people who only show up with smoke. Part 6. Don't argue. Don't explain. You don't argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't explain yourself to those who benefit from twisting your words. That's a trap, and you've stopped falling for it. Every time you argue, you hand them your energy. Every time you explain, you hand them your strategy. Both make your position weaker. Whenever you try to defend yourself to someone who's already made up their mind, you lose power. You don't need to clear your name in a room where your silence isn't respected. You walk out, you shut the door, and let your silence speak on your behalf. When you argue, they believe they matter. When you explain, they think you need them to understand. But when you do neither, they're left exposed, alone with their assumptions, alone with their guilt, and it eats at them. People want you to engage because engagement means attachment. But The moment you stop engaging, you cut the invisible thread they've been using to pull you back. You remove the illusion of influence. They call you cold, arrogant, difficult. Let them. That's not your burden. That's the consequence of no longer tolerating manipulation disguised as connection. So don't argue. Don't explain. Let them talk. Let them spin the story however they need to protect their fragile ego. You don't correct them. You don't reply. You simply remove yourself from the dynamic and leave them wrestling with a silence they never expected. That's not pettiness. That's power. When you walked away without a word, you left behind something far more haunting than rage. Unanswered questions. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confrontation. It wasn't revenge. It was just this, lingering questions echoing in the mind of someone who once believed they knew you completely. You didn't explode. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You simply changed the temperature in the room and left. Quietly, intentionally. And it's that subtle shift, that calm, calculated absence that now haunts them. Because people expect chaos when they've caused you pain. They expect emotional breakdowns, dramatic scenes, tearful texts, desperate confessions. But you gave them none of that. You gave them silence, cold, clean, surgical. And that rattles them more than any scream ever could. They can't pinpoint the exact moment it happened. When your responses grew shorter, when your eyes became colder, when your voice turned distant. But now they feel it in every second of your absence. You've become a gap in their reality, a glitch in the rhythm they took for granted. And what confuses them most is that you're not bitter. You're not posting cryptic quotes. You're not seeking attention. You're just gone, present in the world, but absent from their life. And that absence, it feels like a punishment they can't explain, not even to themselves. Because on paper, you did nothing wrong. You just stopped dancing for their approval. Let them wonder. Let them scroll through old messages, dissecting your final words for clues. Let them overanalyze every silence that came without warning. Because people fear what they can't define. And right now, you are undefined. You are formless. You are unnameable. They'll tell others that you changed, that you became cold, that you stopped caring. Good. Let them. What they won't say is why. They won't admit how they slowly chipped away at your respect, how they crossed boundaries you withdrew again and again, how they mistook your loyalty for weakness. So let them talk. Every word they speak about your change is a confession of what they did to cause it. You don't have to correct them. Your silence already is. And eventually, they'll stop speaking and start thinking. And when they do, they won't find peace. They'll find guilt. They're starting to realize something is missing, but they can't name it. And that absence stings more than any goodbye ever could. You were once too available, too understanding, too patient. And they got comfortable with that version of you, the one who explained every mood, apologized for every boundary, gave second, third, and even fourth chances. The version of you who stayed long after they stopped deserving your presence. But that version, it's gone. It died the moment you realized that explaining yourself to people who only listen to respond is a form of self-betrayal. You changed, not because you became cold, but because you understood that you can't make someone see your worth by handing them a flashlight. They either see it in the dark, or they never will. Now, they're left with silence. Not the kind that begs for attention, but the kind that breeds obsession. Because your detachment wasn't emotional cowardice. It was emotional mastery. You didn't run. You rose quietly, strategically, purposefully. And what sends them into a spiral isn't that you left. It's how you left. You walked away without giving them a villain to blame. And now their ego is starving. Starving for a reason, for a story, for anything that helps them sleep at night. But all they're left with is a question. What changed? And the longer they ask it, the more power you hold. They might reach out with just checking in messages, with hollow apologies wrapped in nostalgia. But it won't be because they've grown. It'll be because your silence has become unbearable. Because now they finally see you weren't the problem. You were the pattern breaker. You were the one who stopped spinning in circles and walked straight out of the storm, and they feel the weight of that decision, even if they'll never say it aloud. Let them wonder. Let them regret. Let them make up whatever story they need, just to understand a new you. You owe them no clarity. Growth doesn't come with a manual. Transformation doesn't send invitations. You upgraded quietly. You evolved without a performance. And the person they're looking for no longer exists. Not because you're pretending, but because you finally became the version of you were once too patient to be. Because sometimes mystery lives longer than explanation. When they couldn't find the old version of you anymore, all they had left was silence, a silence that echoes louder than any goodbye. An explanation ends the story, but a mystery, it keeps it alive. You don't want to be remembered for the last thing you said. You want to be remembered as the one who left without a trace and whose silence echoes every time they reach out for someone who no longer exists. You are not closure. You are consequence. And the most powerful thing about that is they handed it to themselves. They'll say it doesn't bother them, that they're fine, that they've moved on, and maybe they'll even convince a few people. But deep down, in the quiet moments, the ones no one sees, they'll scroll through your old photos, reread your messages, try to remember the sound of your voice, and all they'll be left with is a feeling, that eerie, hollow, piercing feeling of a door closing without making a sound. And that will haunt them far longer than any words you could have spoken. So no, don't explain, don't argue. Let them wonder. Let your absence linger in their memory. Let it crawl under their skin every time they try to recreate your energy in someone else and fail. Let the silence become a mirror, one they'll have to stare into long after you've stopped looking back. Part 8. You've already won. You win the moment you stop chasing validation. You win the second you stop defending your choices. And you checkmate the moment you let someone drown in the silence they created. While you stand in total emotional control, that's not just peace, that's power. You didn't win because you punished them, not because you hurt them, but because you healed without needing them. That's the final move most never see coming. The quiet evolution, the chapter they can't interrupt, the upgrade they'll never access. You win when they're still explaining your silence to people who never met you. You win when they keep checking your profile, looking for signs that you've slipped. You win when they sit across from someone who reminds them of you, but never quite matches. They may have won the argument, but you won the aftermath. You became the unresolved chapter in a book they can't stop rereading. And the best part, you're not even in the library anymore. They thought your strength was in how much you could endure, how long you could stay, how much you could forgive. They thought your strength was in how much you could endure, but they never realized you weren't enduring, you were learning. All those chances you gave, they weren't signs of weakness. They were training grounds. You were studying human behavior. You were watching patterns unfold. You were testing the limits of your own tolerance. And then one day, with no warning, no drama, you stopped. You didn't send a goodbye text. You didn't announce your departure. You simply walked out of a story you were never meant to be trapped in. And you started writing a new one in silence. And that silence, that was your victory lap. Let them believe they're still in control. Let them think they had the last word. That illusion comforts them. But deep down, they know what the silence meant. It meant they were no longer worthy of your presence. It meant they no longer had the power to trigger you. They'll never say it aloud. Most never do. But their actions will scream it. Every failed attempt to replace you. Every vague post. Every time they ask someone else, hey, do you know how they're doing? That's the residue of losing someone who left with dignity and never looked back. You already won. Not because you were chosen, not because you were understood, but because you chose yourself quietly, completely. You healed in the shadows while they performed for the crowd. You didn't trade dignity for attention. You didn't have to prove your worth. You let them underestimate you, and then you outgrew the entire situation. Now, you don't need revenge. You are the revenge. Your growth, your silence, your emotional discipline, that's what makes you untouchable. They tried to provoke you, tried to drag you back, but you kept your hands clean. You didn't reply to insults, didn't clarify your side. You remained still while they unraveled. And that stillness, it became a mirror, a brutally honest mirror they couldn't escape. Because in your silence, there was no one left to blame, only their own reflection and the echo of everything they did when they thought you'd never leave. But the world kept spinning, and you kept rising, not out of spite, out of principle, because you finally learned peace isn't something you ask for, it's something you enforce. You don't react to chaos anymore. You recognize it, and you remove it. When you stopped acting in someone else's script, that wasn't just a win. That was your declaration you're done playing roles in stories that never belonged to you. You already won. Not because you yelled, not because you fought, but because you stopped bleeding in front of people who would use your wounds against you. You stopped explaining the fire you walked through to those who only ever saw smoke. You didn't become the lesson through revenge. You became it through refinement. You built a life, disciplined, calm, detached from their emotional chaos. A life so intact that your silence itself became a monument to your growth. And while they may never admit it, they feel it every time. They meet someone with your kindness, but without your depth, with your presence, but without your energy, with your attention, but without your detachment. They'll feel what they lost, and you won't need to lift a single finger. Part 9, the final reminder. Don't argue. Don't explain. Let them wonder. That's no longer a phrase. That's your law now. In a world addicted to reactions, you become powerful the moment you stop giving them what they expect. You stop trying to be understood by people who never truly listen. You stop breaking yourself into fragments just to prove a point. You stop explaining yourself to those who were never truly curious, only entitled. And when you do that, when you finally master the restraint to say nothing where others would have screamed, you become untouchable. You become the unresolved mystery that eats at them in silence. Understand this: if they could shake you, they would have. If they could drag you back into the chaos, they would have. But they can't. Not anymore, because you stopped giving them your emotional currency. You stopped withdrawing from your dignity just to keep their comfort alive. You stopped softening their disrespect with your compassion. You burned the bridge. No smoke, no fire, no warning. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. Let them think they won. Let them laugh louder, move faster, post more. It doesn't matter. You're not playing that game anymore. You're not even in the same arena. While they're reacting, you're rising. You didn't retreat for attention. You went quiet to rebuild your control, not to be seen, but to rise. While they wonder where you disappeared to, you've been mastering the art of never returning. They may celebrate loud victories, but your quiet wins, they last much, much longer. There will be moments when you're tempted to explain, to defend your transformation, to clarify your peace. Single quotes T. They won't hear you, not because they can't, but because they refuse. Because understanding you would require confronting themselves, and most people would rather villainize your silence than admit their role in your withdrawal. Let them. You owe them nothing, not even closure. You don't have to be heartless to protect your heart. You don't have to be cruel to create distance. You just have to stop performing, stop convincing, stop saving people from the consequences of losing you. The truth: some people never appreciate calm until they're drowning in chaos without you. Some never respect boundaries until they crash right through them. And some only realize your worth when they hear nothing from you ever again. That's the price of access, and before, it was far too cheap. Now, it's locked, it's sacred, because now you understand, not everyone deserves front row seats to your life. Some only came to steal the spotlight. And now that the curtain's closed, they're still sitting in their seats, hoping the show will start again. But you've left the stage. You've exited the story. Let them wonder. Let them rewrite the past in their minds. Let them twist your silence into whatever narrative helps them cope. But you stay still. You stay disciplined. You stay far, far away from the noise. Because your new life, your new energy, your new standard requires silence, requires self-respect, requires peace. And the moment you defend that peace instead of your past, you never lose again. So if you're still listening right now, comment it one last time. I don't argue, I upgrade. Not for me, not for them, for you got to mark the shift, to confirm the transformation, to make this no longer theory, but your new way of life. And if this message hit that part of you that once explained, once pleaded, once tried to be understood, then you know what to do now. Don't speak, don't react, don't explain, let them wonder. Like this video if this resonated with you. Subscribe if you're ready to become unshakable and never explain your evolution to anyone again.